Tonight on Mark Latham's Outsiders, we'll be talking to Tommy Robinson out of London about what we've learned since September 11, 16 years ago in the fight against radical Islamic terrorism. We'll be talking to Sam Newman, that legend of the footy show, about larrikinism, political correctness and what the hell is happening in Victoria. We've got Zeg's Cartoons, we've got the Outsiders Outhouse, we've got the Left Lunatic of the Week. We've got so much coming up. I'm coming to you right in front of the Exchange Hotel in Kalgoorlie, Western Australia. Thanks for watching. It's a great show. Stay tuned. Trigger warning, viewers. You've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, proudly Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs program. We don't have an ideological agenda here. We just give you information unfiltered. Unlike the mainstream media, where they've got a whole list of taboo subjects and taboo words that can't be used, our information for you is unfiltered. We just give you the straight talk, the all-important straight talk, so you can make up your own mind about the things that are happening to Australia, the negative things, some of the good things. We just cover the other side of the story you just won't see in the mainstream media. Now, after this short break, we're going to have someone who's up front and has a lot of integrity about his views on radical Islamic terrorism. I'll be talking to Tommy Robinson out of London. Well, Tommy Robinson, welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders. 2 days ago we had yet another anniversary of September 11. What have we learned in the West in that period, the 16 years?
I'd say we've learned very little. We've actually gone backwards. If you look at history, and what I realised through the research, which was from my latest book, was that prior to 2011, all academics, all our clergy, all previous leaders, they all told the truth, a very honest truth about Islam. And in fact, it's only since 2011 that the phrase Islam is a religion of peace has been brought about. Since then, since George Bush said in the days afterwards that Islam is a religion of peace, it's like if you tell a lie, it spreads like wildfire. That term wasn't around before that. No one ever used that. In fact, if you look at William Gladstone, he held the Quran above his head and said there'll never be peace in this earth so long as we have this book. This is a violent, cursed book. If you look at Winston Churchill, you can look at many leaders. If you look at previous presidents of America, everyone just told the honest truth about Islam. So I'd say we've actually, the people who are put in place to educate us and warn us of threats and dangers are completely deceiving us. And the general public, I'd say there's a massive wall which the media play their part in, which is the deception of the masses to what Islam is and the dangers it poses to all of us. Well,
it's a good point. Just for the benefit of our viewers, the book is called Muhammad's Quran, Why Muslims Kill for Islam. It's written by Tommy Robinson, co-authored by Peter McLaughlin. And you mentioned Winston Churchill. I noticed there, Tommy, one of the chapters in the book is the crime of quoting Winston Churchill. What's all that about?
That's about as well. So if you take what Winston Churchill said, so many things he said Islam in a man is like rabies in a dog. That's what the equivalent of what he said. He also said, so right now, Winston Churchill will be viewed as a bigot, as an extremist, and as an Islamophobe. So would most other leaders in our country's history, whether they be military leaders or political leaders. Now, he also said individual Muslims will show amazing traits, but he called them Mohammedans. But he said that Islam will hold them back, and Islam has the power to bring Europe back to the Dark Ages. This is what he said. Now, Paul Weston quoted what he said in a British town centre a few years ago, and he was arrested for hate speech for quoting Churchill. He quoted Churchill. Yes, he was arrested.
For quoting Winston Churchill, legendary British leader. Who's Paul Weston, and what happened to him? What punishment did he
Paul Weston was a leader. At that time, he was leader of a political party, and I believe he was standing for election somewhere. In fact, at the time this happened, I wasn't about. I was away in custody. But he done it in Winchester. It was in Winchester. So, and all he done was read quotes from Winston Churchill. Police arrested him for inciting religious or racial hatred, which is where we're at It's where we're at. So honest, open speaking, which is what Churchill did, it's what Gladstone did, it's what all people in our history always did. They warned the public of what Islam was. They warned of what dangers it posed to us. Right now, we're being told lie and lie again. If you look at our previous world leaders and you compare them to Tony Blair, David Cameron, the leaders now who they make all these statements like Islam is religion of peace or Islam doesn't believe it. They back it up with nothing. They back it up with nothing.
Well, it is the political correctness of our time. Last week on this show, I quoted information I had from a high school in Sydney, Menai High School, where after the Manchester bombing, the principal there at the school assembly described Islam as a beautiful religion and said that in relation to the Manchester bombing there, the pop concert, that Christianity had done things just as bad through history, and it seemed very disrespectful to the people who lost their lives and their loved ones out of Manchester. And it's hardly surprising in Australian schools we do have problems of radicalisation. If you're excusing away the crimes of radical Islam, then obviously radicalisation becomes a real issue. Do you have that sort of problem in the British school system where similar things would be said?
You will not believe me. You know, so 2 days after the Manchester bombing, in a school in Manchester, we have a programme called Educate in Manchester, which is following what's happening in the schools, videoing all the pupils. What they did is, 2 days after the Manchester attack, they got a Syrian refugee to get all the school children to get down on their knees. These are white English school children, to get down on their knees and pray on the floor. These are non-Muslim kids. And pray on the floor whilst all cheering Allah Akbar. In Manchester, 2 days after that attack. And exactly the same again, where the school teachers were saying how beautiful Islam is, which the problem is, they all make these statements, they back it up with nothing. The history of Islam speaks for itself. The scripture of Islam speaks for itself. Muhammad's actions speak for themselves. He was a violent man, a very violent man, a very immoral man. Now, at the same time, one of these school teachers said that she's teaching the pupils, she says, there's huge similarities between Hitler and Trump, Donald Trump. Now, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. And this is the education system. And I say that in the sense that even when I was preparing for a debate, I was here at home and I had lots of leaflets prepared out. And my daughter was 9 years old and she walked past with her friend. And I had a leaflet, I had something about Donald Trump because I was going to be talking at Columbia University in America. And she said, and her friend said, Trump, he's like Hitler. And I said, where have you got that from? School. So it's not just so, and the whole of our country. In fact, I'm doing a video about it this week about the documentary Educate in Manchester, to see what agenda is being pushed on our pupils and the lies. And that's what it is, the lies. I wouldn't mind in the UK. I don't know if you've got this in Australia, but every school child has to visit the mosque. They all have to go as a school trip where they get told they can't bring meat in their sandwiches. They have to cover their arms. The girls have to cover their arms. Can't wear short sleeves or skirts. They have to dress appropriately to go to a mosque, where they're then stood up while the imam feeds them a pack of lies. It's like, I wouldn't mind if they brought the children to the mosque and told them Muhammad married a child who was 6, your age. He consummated that marriage when she was 9. He murdered. He done this, but they don't. They're selectively teaching how great Islam is and how beautiful Islam is. And anyone who's picked up the Quran, anyone who's picked up the life of Muhammad, the biography of Muhammad, anyone who's gone through the hadiths knows full well who Muhammad was and what Islam is.
We don't have that program here in Australia, but I think for parents in all Western countries, there's a real issue. What is being taught in the schools? And unless you go to the trouble of asking your children at the end of every day, what were you taught? What did you hear about? What was said? Parents are kept in the dark. And part of the mentality in Australia is to try and keep parents out of the system. That teachers are thinking they're the parents and they have a role as politicians to indoctrinate the students. So that's the issue we have in Australia. If I can just come to your book, it seems to me that while, sure, there's evidence in the Quran of statements there that could be regarded as inciting violence, is there also a cultural dimension? Because certainly in Australia, around the world, not every single part of the Muslim community commits acts of violence. In Australia, for instance, we took a lot of Lebanese Muslims as refugees in the late 1970s. And second and third generation on, they seem to be committing, or they're suspected of, acts of terror in Australia more than any other group. So what weight do you and Peter McLaughlin give to the cultural dimension, that certain parts of the Islamic community are more prone to this, this violent tendency?
I'd say that a lot of it comes down to the sects as well. The sects within Islam. It's,
yeah.
For example, if I talk about Manchester again, where the bombing was, I've been doing research here for the mosques again. The Deobandi, the Salafist, the Wahhabist. These are the problematic mosques. Now, if we look at terrorism, it all comes back down to them every time. It's not coming from many of the other sects. We're not seeing the terrorist extremism coming from the other sects. And that comes down to their literal interpretation of the Quran. They take it literally. And Abdul Wahhab, 200 years ago, who attempted to reform Islam. And of course, when you reform something that stems from barbaric violence, you'll get more barbaric violence, which is what we've ended up with. Now, and it is correct to say that the majority of Muslims, and the majority of Muslims I meet, they don't know the Quran inside out. They don't go to mosque every day. They don't. But they still blindly defend. I've sat with friends. I went to school with these two Afghani boys who were my good friends at school. And I sat down with them in Luton Town Centre a few years ago. And they said, I don't think it's as bad as what you say. I said, don't think, but you don't know, do you? And when I started talking to them about the history and the life of Muhammad and the scripture, they had no idea. They were oblivious to most of what I was saying that has happened within Islam. And a lot of that then come from the fact that they just don't know. And that's what I say. And they're taught to blindly defend it. So, yes, I'd say the majority of Muslims going about their normal daily life are not the problem, which is what I say, which is why I specifically say, and some leftists can't get this in their head. They really can't. I say you can oppose Islam. You can pick at the scripture and the book without hating every Muslim, without hating ordinary people. So I say Muslims are people. Islam is an ideology. Islam is an idea. We are within our God-given right to be critical of that idea. And everyone should be when we see the huge problems we face. And we keep getting told that they're not true Muslims. Abadi was the terrorist from Manchester. And I had a man tell me, a Muslim man tell me he wasn't a Muslim. Abadi could recite the Quran without looking at it. Yeah? He didn't need to look at the Quran. He knew every single verse and chapter. He was an expert on Islam. I asked the Muslim I met to recite, I named some verses. Give me Surah 9:5. Give me he couldn't. I said, so here you are. You know nothing really about your own religion, but you're telling me that the man who can recite it verse for verse for verse for verse, who's gone out and committed an act of jihad based on the scripture evidence, you're telling me he's not. And so many times this is what we see, and this is the problem we see. And I don't blame. It's a difficult one because when you have Muslims, it's part of their identity. It's a difficult one to try and push against them, but they have to, at some point, realise why this is happening. And I think many of them are naive to the agenda of Islam.
Yeah, well, one of the benefits on this show, I have Muslims here interviewed on the program, like Emma Eros, Tanvir Ahmed, who actively urge other Muslims not to take a literal interpretation of all aspects of the Quran, particularly the violent sections. Don't we need a major campaign by government, public broadcasters, other sections of the media to promote Muslims who hold that view, saying that it's plain wrong to take a literal interpretation of the violent sections? What's happening in Britain in that regard? Do you have any such campaign, or those voices are marginalised?
In that regard, I had a meeting this week. I went over and interviewed. You'll see the video coming out this week with a man called Hussein, who, this is where we have the huge problem. If you have Muslims who don't accept this, okay, like this man didn't, he left Islam. He became an apostate of Islam in 2008. Since then, which you'll see in the videos, he's had attempts on his life. His house has been attacked with fireworks. He has lived with his 6 children under constant threat and persecution. Now, when he went to the police, no one helped him. None of these crimes were treated as religiously motivated or hate speech or hate crimes. None of them. They were treated as neighbourly disputes. In the end, this man was beaten with pickaxes till his knee was shattered. He nearly died. Only then did the police, and when you see this footage, Mark, this is in the UK, the police come in with machine guns. They come to his house and they said, we need to take you away now. You're going to get killed. So then they take him out with his 6 children, and they're guarding the road with their guns. And then they take him out and they remove him hundreds of miles away to a safe house where he now lives, where no one can know where he lives. If he wants to go back into the city of Bradford in the north of England for anything to do with his business or his old house or to sort anything out, he has to contact the police. They then get armed response. They then come with machine guns and they bring him in and bring him out. That's what's happening in the UK for a man who expressed his freedom of religion.
Wow.
So what we should have is anyone who doesn't accept this violence, we should be helping them leave. We should be helping them find the right path of life. But unfortunately, when I've done this interview with him, you will not believe what the council done, what the councillors done, the Muslim representatives, everybody. Do you know, when he left Islam, he went into his local shop with his children, and the man serving in the shop, who had been his friend for 20 years in that community, said, you know, if we was in Pakistan, I'd behead you myself. In front of his kids, and he said, this is the battle of what we're up against.
Well, it's a desperate situation there. Australia's not as bad by the sound of it. You really do have some major problems there, Tommy. So we've run out of time, unfortunately, so thanks for joining us. Our viewers really appreciate the update you give from London on the British circumstance. Good luck with the sales of the book. It sounds like it's a valuable service in explaining to people the various aspects of the Quran that aren't widely understood. So hopefully you'll be back here on Mark Latham's Outsiders in the future. Thanks, Tommy Robertson. And in a short while...
Anytime, Mark.
A pleasure. Thanks, Tommy. And in a short while, we'll be back talking to Sam Newman. Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders. I'm delighted to say our next guest will be Sam Newman, who's a legend of the AFL footy show. He's held that program together for many, many years. He's retired from his own very fine AFL career at the Geelong Football Club for 35 years now, but very often he's much more in the news. He's politically incorrect. He's in the news more than the current serving AFL players. So Sam Newman is a legend of the game. He's a great Australian larrikin. We haven't got enough larrikins, perhaps a dying breed in our country. But for those not familiar with the work of Sam Newman on the footy show, here's a highlights package, and you'll see he can be a very, very funny man. Over to you, Sam, on the footy show.
2 weeks, Sam Newman abusing a goal umpire.
Why didn't I realise when he took the first lot off that probably the second lot were going to go in? Oh, there you go. We're still on there.
Well, that could have been very embarrassing, Sammy. If anyone here had a magnifying glass.
A present from the Pies, and for, you know, for a great 150th, mate, just... Jeez, Ed, get that bubble again, will you?
Gary Lyon's case, I'm incensed at the repeated playing back of the footage of him being taken from the ground in agony with a severely broken leg. I think this is what she's talking about. Let's just check that again. Perhaps, Sam, you idiot, you should apologise to Gary on air. What, for showing this?
You said never, ever again on this show.
The reaction gets bigger to it every week.
I'm going to tell you. I'll guarantee you this. If it comes up again, I'm going to belt you.
Every time you show Gary on the stretcher, me and my mate scull a shot of vodka. Well, Dazza, are we going to get you pissed tonight? All the very best. Prost. Here we go, down the hatch. Straight to that, Gary. All the best. Congratulations, all the very best. All the best. Heard enough.
Sam Newman, welcome to Mark Latham's Outsiders.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Now, one of our dedicated viewers is Anne Easby, who was out there for the Swans Essendon game at the SCG on Saturday. She reports that the rainbow flag was flying right next to the Swans flag above the stands at the Sydney Cricket Ground. And she's written in as follows: the AFL is pure left-wing politics. They have rounds dedicated to every cause except middle-aged white hetero guys. I suppose that's you and me, Sam. It drives many conservative older members like me bonkers. Now, can you explain why the AFL has gone down the path of politics? Most people go to the footy to get away from rubbish like politics. So why bring it into the footy?
Well, the AFL set themselves up as the arbiter of everything that's righteous and proper in the world. They think that they reflect public attitudes, but I share exactly the same opinion as you and the person who wrote that letter, that people go to the football to get away from political agendas, and I don't know why we have any political agendas. I will save one agenda, if you like, and that's the pink lady appeal for women's breast cancer, if it's got something to do with health. That's about it. But after that, I think people go to get away from the frustrations and the barrage of political content from agenda seekers, and that is their outlet. And I honestly don't know why they do it, and I don't know why there's not a more strenuous demand for it just to be left alone, Mark.
Yeah, it should just be footy, it should just be sport. Now, I assume the AFL is going to be campaigning in favour of same-sex marriage. The National Rugby League has announced that. Now, Sam, what sort of country are we becoming? What does this encourage in the development of character and resilience? There's a bloke in the Fairfax Press today, Andrew Webster, who's written applauding the NRL decision to support same-sex marriage. He said he loved his footy, but he hated himself. In absolute silence, I devised ways to commit suicide if anyone ever discovered the dirty little secret that I was gay. So obviously as a younger bloke, he was in a bit of strife there. But really, are you going to get yourself out of strife because some semi-anonymous football administrator says he's in favour of same-sex marriage? What sort of country do we become when, instead of building resilience, we're actually caving into people who are a bit feeble in their character and they've got no resilience at all?
That is an extremely provocative thing to say, Mark. Look, the world is evolving and people have a right to do and be whoever they like. The only problem with all that is that if you do have an opinion, one way or the other, about gay marriage or whatever, you are condemned if you have a contrary opinion to those who push an agenda. And if you are a Catholic or have been brought up to, in an older generation, to just not think that it's a good idea to have gay marriage, well, then you get condemned. You are branded either one of those three great things, either a sexist, a racist, or a homophobe. And of course, what's creeping into the lexicon now is that you are a bigot and a white supremacist. So if you got the five going for you, that is only because you might have a difference of opinion with people who have a right to have their opinion. But never forget this, an opinion is neither right nor wrong. It's an opinion. Only facts are right or wrong. So I don't, if you ask me, am I in favour of gay marriage? There's no answer to that because I don't wish to get into the public discussion as to why I support one way or the other. I frankly don't have enough time left on this planet to worry about things like that, and I don't want to get involved in the conversation other than say it's a private matter for me. And if you have an agenda, go ahead.
Well, someone with an opinion is Harry O'Brien, the former Collingwood and Melbourne defender. He's all over the media now, mostly attacking you, Sam, and he's been putting out a documentary at SBS, and he's described you on the Footy Show as producing years of crude and gratuitous racism and sexism. How do you respond to that?
We're crude and gratuitous, but we are the most non-discriminatory show on television. We don't have parody or satire with people based on their race, their ethnicity, their sex, or their gender. We just have a go at everyone. So we are fairly non-discriminatory. Harry, of course, exploits the narrative and gets away with what he says because people don't wish to challenge him or what he believes in, because you all automatically get pigeonholed into one of those 3 areas that I suggested. But he's entitled to his opinion. He would be not cognizant of the fact that I couldn't care less what he thinks about me, and that's a fact. So he's entitled to do whatever he likes. He is of no interest, his opinions or who he is or what he does. I have no interest in him at all. So it's probably mutual.
I always find the Footy Show, you know, hilarious. Your stuff over the years, without pissing in your pocket, has been very, very funny. And I subscribe to the view put out there by the great John Cleese. Just because you have a joke about someone or a certain group doesn't mean you dislike them. Most likely you're quite fond of them and you want more of them in your life. That's why you're having a bit of fun and a bit of humour about them. So do you find it annoying that among the media elites you cop a bagging all the time for having a bit of joke, a bit of fun, when in your heart of hearts I'm sure you don't mean any nastiness to anyone in particular?
Well, people set up arbitrary frameworks of reference, as someone once said, and then go on to base all their arguments based on a false premise. And I honestly, I don't, I know people say these things, but I haven't got a computer, so I'm not on that pernicious thing called social media. I don't know what people say about me. I don't read the papers. I'm not into it. So I don't mind what people say about me. I've always said this, as long as they don't mind what I say about them after I'm told what they've said about me. But it's, we not specialise, we are into parody and satire on our show. As I say, we take the piss out of every section of society. We try to. We don't take ourselves too seriously. The first people we have a go at is ourselves, and then we think everyone's fair game after that. Now, having said that, there are standards that we have to adhere to. Sometimes we step over the mark, and that is, of course, the legacy of doing live television. We're one of the only television shows in Australia that goes actually live to air, no delay, no sort of second guesses. So sometimes we err, but usually we're pretty comfortable with what we do, and we're happy to say that we're a little edgy and a little gratuitous. That doesn't worry us at all.
Now, Sam, as a proud Victorian, can you explain to me and the rest of the country, how did Victoria become the PC capital of Australia? You've got more of this crap flowing out of your institutions and systems down there in Victoria than any other part of the country. How did Victoria become so loopy when it comes to political correctness?
Well, maybe they've heard of Harry Truman when he said that political correctness is a doctrine fostered by a delusional and illogical minority. And you see, political correctness is, it's almost cringeful. For those who are partially educated, it's almost cringeful or sort of annoying, really, because you stifle any meaningful conversation that you want to have about someone or something because you are intimidated into not having it. So we for example, we down here, there's a couple of councils have cancelled Australia Day because they don't think that we should celebrate the fact that Europeans came to this country. I'm part of European settlement. I like to celebrate Australia Day, and we are inclusive. We like to respect those people who are here before us, and we would hope they would respect us. But it just goes on and on and on. There's plenty of examples of being politically correct that are really just driven by people with agendas and people who have a political point to make, and they're the people that actually the vocal minority who are running the world. Just have a look at what's happening in the States.
Well, that's true, and don't you think one of the problems with political correctness and the way it's flourished is that too many people have caved in to the outrage industry, all this confected outrage where people get on social media and other places complaining and whinging. Now, you're back on the Footy Show with Eddie Maguire. I've got to say, Eddie lost me at the point where he caved in to the protests about his joke about Caro Wilson, putting her under the water there. He didn't mean any physical harm to her. It was purely a joke. Yet he caved in, he apologised, he had to do counselling with Rosie Batty and Phil Cleary. Now, come on, what are you going to do to toughen up Eddie to tell the outrage industry to go get nicked? He was only having a bit of a joke and he shouldn't be caving in all the time.
Well, that's the pressure that, you see, he has to remain credible, Eddie. He is a captain of industry. He's at the forefront of his career and what he does. And they are the community standards that his employer requires him to adhere to. But you see, that was completely hijacked by the agenda seekers, because exactly the same comments were made on a different radio station. But because it was Eddie, they like to tap in on those people that'll get mileage and get some oxygen out of going at the man at the top of the list. So I've had a run-in with Caroline Wilson. I've had a run-in with I painted my face black pretending I was a bloke called Nicky Winmar. Of course, racism is people use the term just at the drop of a hat for expedience. Racism is if you defile, degrade, or decry someone, think you're superior than them, or try to control them. None of those things are ever when you are accused of racism. Most of those things never come into it. It's just one of those catchphrases that rolls off the tongue, and then the Hollywood elite exploit it beautifully. The Hollywood elite are a disgrace with what they're doing in America. They are nothing more than psychotic, treacherous anarchists, and most of them are mentally unstable, and half of them are on opioids and just speak absolute nonsense about their country, and it is frightening to see what's going on over there.
It is indeed, Sam. Now we're in the middle of the finals series in the AFL. We've got to get a tip from you. Is it Tiger time, or are they going to choke again? Old Richmond, they normally choke this time of year, although they had a big win the other night. What's your tip? Your old club, Geelong?
Well, I after the Swans lost the first 6 games and then won the next 6, I said, that the Swans would win the grand final. They've got the momentum with them. I hope Geelong beat them on Friday. I don't think they will. I hope Richmond beat them in the grand final if they get there. I don't think they will. The Swans, unfortunately for me, because we are a Melbourne-based organisation here, I know it's a national competition, but we like to see the Victorian sides prevail. But I think the Swans will take the buttered confection at the end of the year. We've had two pretty ordinary games and one fantastic game on Saturday, but the way the game's played, you could never understand which way it would go, because it's an illogical mishmash of contrived nonsense most of the time, our game.
Well, Sam, thanks for that. The fan I mentioned at the start, Anne Easby, she's been a 20-year Swans fan, so you've made her night. She's a big fan of yours as well. She loves the Swans. She just doesn't want to see the rainbow flag flying over the Sydney cricket ground. Thanks for joining us this evening. And for our viewers, we'll be back in a short while to have a look at Zeg's cartoons for the week. Thanks, Sam. Welcome back to the show. Another busy week in Australian politics, and the great Zeg, our cartoonist in residence, has been hard at work again looking at the activities out of Canberra, and his first cartoon is a pretty accurate reflection on the polling woes of Malcolm Turnbull. Down in the polls, 53-47 pretty consistently, and there's poor old Malcolm in the blue tie saying that, hang on, why haven't I turned the corner? I'm almost as leftist as Bill Shorten, and the figures prove it. I'm actually on your side. He's saying that to all the media goons there, some of them dressed up in the old Soviet gear. Well, it's a sad reflection on Turnbull that if people want a real Labor government, they'll vote for Bill Shorten. So Malcolm, that's the very reason you're behind in the polls. And Zeg's second cartoon has a look at Bill Shorten indeed, Blackout Bill, with his crazy renewable energy target. We saw in South Australia they can't keep the lights on. Well, here's Zeg pointing out among the cavemen that way back when, before the year 2100, so way back when, the Australians elected Blackout Bill, and this is how we ended up after he said he'd never build another dirty coal-fired power station. Back to the Stone Age, which is a reflection on South Australia, and it looks like Bill Shorten's bringing the same energy policy model to Canberra. So thanks very much, Zeg, for that. Magnificent as ever. And Zeg's also been on the job with our left lunatic of the week. Have a look at this guy at the lectern. He joins a magnificent gallery of left imbeciles. There he is. Have a look at him in the pink jacket there, the rainbow colours. It's Benjamin Law from Fairfax Media, who's disgraced himself this week with the most bizarre tweet coming to light. Benjamin Law on Twitter said late last month, sometimes find myself wondering if I'd hate F-U-C-K, that's right, hate F-U-C-K, all the anti-gay MPs in Parliament if it meant they got the homophobia out of their system. Well, turn it up, Benjamin. You're an absolute idiot. If you think this is humour, it's about as funny as a burning orphanage. The truth is, for someone who says we should vote for same-sex marriage on the basis of tolerance, where's his tolerance when he says this about MPs he doesn't like? He's written for Black Ink a quarterly essay on the Safe Schools program, supposedly about anti-bullying. Well, this is bullying MPs by saying you'd hate F-U-C-K them. I think this works on the basis you don't like them, you have sex with them to humiliate them. Isn't this the whole point of what people like Benjamin Law are supposed to be campaigning against? He is a very deserving winner of the Left Lunatic of the Week. An absolute fruitcake for what he said there, and hopefully he plays no further role in Australian public life off the back of that outrageous tweet and his follow-up comments in the media. And now we go to the Outsiders Outhouse. I really appreciate all the feedback we get from the viewers about the issues of the day, the nature of the program. Please send in your email comments to mark.latham@therebel.media. You'll see it there. Zeg's got me on the thunderbox. mark.latham@therebel.media. Keep the comments coming in because they're all of great value in rounding out the program. And the first of them comes from Gunther Matheson in Brisbane, and he says he'd like to share a short story with me. He writes as follows: I lost my sight 9 years ago and rely very much on my computer to access news and current affairs via the internet and screen reading software. The software does not work well with disorganised websites and pages. As a result, I looked for the least complicated news site and found the Sydney Morning Herald, providing a text-only news option. Sadly, the SMH is very one-sided, and I found after years of lefties propaganda, I did not have a balanced view of many current affairs. Luckily, Mark Latham's Outsiders came along and I tried to listen as often as possible. Thanks very much, Gunther, for your support. Can I give out a big shout out to your site developers, since your site is easy to navigate even for blind supporters. Love your work. Thank you for providing a fair and balanced view. Well, thank you, Gunther, in your circumstances for following our news and current affairs. Thank you for your praise of our site developers. Who'll be chuffed that you've said that, and I'm glad you've found some balance and fairness in your media coverage and consumption. So that's a wonderful letter that makes us all feel very, very good of what we're doing here at Mark Latham's Outsiders. Our second item in the outhouse is from Gary Sheen in Penrith, who writes as follows: Penrith, New South Wales. Hi Mark, hope all is well. Me and the missus enjoyed the show this week. Fantastic, me and the missus. We're hoping to see more segments of you out in the streets. That's the part we enjoy most. Well, we've got some more street talk coming up in the near future, Gary. He goes on to write, we're only quite young, so we never had the chance to follow your career in politics. But from Wikipedia, it says you were a Labor Party leader. The question we had is, what were the life events, light bulb moments which switch you from being more left-wing on the political spectrum to common sense, well thought out positions? Well, I'm not too sure I made as big a transition, Gary, as the Labor Party itself, because it's become very much a light green party with social engineering, identity politics. Its energy policies are obviously bad for the economy. It's lost sight of economic growth. I always say, Gary, that what I'm on about in politics is essentially the model that was around during the period of the Hawke government, a very successful government in the 1980s, when I first got interested in politics. Open market economics, surplus budgeting, a strong social safety net for people who need our help. No identity politics, no social engineering. So I don't think I've changed all that much, but the Labor Party's been transformed and becoming a light green party. In terms of light bulb moments, probably the Safe Schools program. When I read that curriculum material, what was being taught in the classroom under Safe Schools, gender fluidity, cultural Marxism, post-structuralism, I became very, very concerned for what was happening to Australia's future. That's not education, it's just propaganda, trying to indoctrinate young people in the classroom. So it was a moment where I thought, wow, we've got to stand up against this kind of rubbish and fight for a better Australia where we reward merit, we treat people on their individual merit, and we believe in the Australian fair go. So Gary, hopefully that answers your question. Our next item in the outhouse comes from Craig Cornish, who's a genius in terms of sending in some of the funny material. I hope you enjoy this story as much as I did. And Craig writes his story out as follows. Sarah was in the fertilised egg business. She had several hundred young pullets and 10 roosters to fertilise the eggs. She kept records, and any rooster not performing, well, went into the soup pot. This took a lot of time, so she brought more tiny bells and attached them to the roosters. Each bell had a different tone, so she could tell from a distance which rooster was performing. Now she could sit on the porch and fill out an efficiency report by just listening to the bells. Sarah's favourite rooster, Old Butch, was a very fine specimen, but this one morning she noticed his bell hadn't rung at all. When she went to investigate, she found Old Butch had his bell in his beak, so it couldn't ring. He'd sneak up on a pullet, do his job, and walk on to the next one. Sarah was so proud of Old Butch, she entered him in a show, and he became an overnight sensation among the judges. The result was the judges not only awarded Old Butch the Nobel Peace Prize. Who thinks this stuff up seriously? The Nobel Peace Prize. They also awarded him the Pulitzer Prize. The Pulitzer Prize as well. Oh, maybe that's just my sense of humour, but I reckon that's as funny as. Nobel Peace Prize, the Pulitzer Prize as well. Clearly Old Butch was a politician in the making. Who else but a politician could figure out how to win two of the most coveted prizes on the planet by being the best at sneaking up on the unsuspecting populace and screwing them when they weren't paying attention. Craig Cornish, thanks very much for sending in that story. I find it absolutely hilarious. And finally, a late entry in the outhouse. Our old buddy there, Louise from Goulburn, has sent in an item, not a letter, but a video presentation. She says this is the definitive statement on gender fluidity, all the safe school stuff, boys can be girls, girls can be boys. You know how it goes, gender fluidity. She has sent in this classic clip, all the wisdom from the life of Brian. We'll go out with the program here. You can't beat the life of Brian. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Wednesday night and leave you with this genius from Monty Python's Life of Brian.
Furthermore, it is the birthright of every man or woman. Why don't you shut up about women, Stan? You're putting us off.
Women have a perfect right to play a part in our movement, Reg.
Why are you always on about women, Stan?
I want to be one.
What?
I want to be a woman. From now on, I want you all to call me Loretta.
What?
It's my right as a man.
Well, why do you want to be Loretta, Stan?
I want to have babies.
You want to have babies?
It's every man's right to have babies if he wants them.
But you can't have babies.
Don't you oppress me.
I'm not oppressing you, Stan. You haven't got a womb. Where's the fetus going to gestate? You're going to keep it in a box?
Here, I've got an idea. Suppose you agree that he can't actually have babies, not having a womb, which is nobody's fault, not even the Romans, but that he can have the right to have babies.
Good idea, Judith. We shall fight the oppressors for your right to have babies, brother. Sister, sorry. What's the point? What? What's the point of fighting for his right to have babies when he can't have babies? It is symbolic of our struggle against oppression.
Symbolic of his struggle against reality.